So today, I want to talk about a country that almost no one is paying attention to in the middle of this war. Everywhere you look, the conversation is dominated by the same names: America, Iran, Israel, China, Saudi Arabia. But there is one nation sitting quietly in the background, watching everything unfold with extreme focus, that I believe could end up being the single biggest surprise winner when all of this is over. And that country is Japan. Now I know what you're thinking. Japan? Seriously? A country with the oldest population in the world. A country that has been trapped in economic stagnation for more than 30 years. A country that imports nearly everything it needs just to function. A country that could be brought to its knees if its supply lines were ever cut. That Japan is going to come out on top? Yes. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why. But before we get there, I want to be completely honest with you. Because if you only look at Japan on the surface, things don't just look bad. They look deeply concerning. So let's start with part 1. Japan's weaknesses. And these weaknesses are real. Let's begin with the most uncomfortable truth. Japan's demographic crisis. Japan doesn't just have an aging population. It has the oldest population in the world. Not one of the oldest, the oldest. More than 28% of its people are over the age of 65. And that number keeps rising every single year. Think about what that means. Fewer workers entering the economy. Lower productivity over time. Reduced innovation. A shrinking base of young people carrying an ever-growing burden of elderly care. This isn't a small issue. It's a structural constraint that directly limits Japan's long-term growth potential. And unlike many other problems, demographics are incredibly hard to reverse. Now let's move to the second issue, the economy. For over 3 decades, Japan has been stuck in what economists call a deflationary spiral. Prices fall or barely rise. Wages remain stagnant. Growth is slow. Debt continues to build. While countries like China were experiencing explosive growth, 8%, 9%, even 10% annually, Japan was moving at around 1%. That gap matters a lot because over time, even small differences in growth rates compound into massive economic divergence. Japan didn't collapse, but it also didn't keep up. It entered what many describe as a state of permanent slow motion. And then there's the third problem: resources. Japan is a small island nation with very limited natural resources. It doesn't have significant oil. It doesn't have large reserves of natural gas. It doesn't have vast agricultural land compared to its population size. So what does it do? It imports almost everything: energy, raw materials, food. Japan depends heavily on global supply chains just to sustain its economy and feed its people. And that leads directly into the fourth, and perhaps most dangerous problem of all: vulnerability. Japan gets roughly 75% of its energy from the GCC, countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. That energy travels by sea, passing through critical choke points like the Strait of Malacca. Now here's where things get serious. Taiwan sits along a crucial part of that route. And China has made it very clear that reunification with Taiwan is not a question of if, but when. If China were to gain control over Taiwan, it would effectively gain leverage over Japan's energy lifeline. Think about that for a moment. China wouldn't even need to fire a single shot. It could simply restrict access, disrupt shipping lanes, or apply pressure. And suddenly, Japan's energy supply, and by extension, its entire economy, would be at risk. This is not a theoretical concern. This is a real strategic vulnerability. So when you step back and look at Japan purely on paper, what do you see? The oldest population in the world, decades of economic stagnation, minimal natural resources, heavy dependence on imported energy, and a clear vulnerability to geopolitical pressure from a rising China. That's not the profile of a country that looks like it's about to win anything. It looks like a country in trouble. And yet, If someone handed me $1 billion today and told me to invest it in East Asia, choosing between China and Japan, I would put every single dollar into Japan. Not 50-50, not diversified, all in Japan. And I want to explain why. Because to truly understand Japan, you cannot just think like an economist. You have to think like a historian. What history actually tells us about Japan. Now this is where everything starts to change. Because if you only look at data, GDP, debt ratios, demographics, Japan looks weak. But history doesn't measure nations the same way economists do. History asks a different question. What does a country do when everything is on the line? What happens when survival itself is threatened? When the odds are overwhelming and failure seems inevitable? And when you look at Japan through that lens, you see something completely different. You see a pattern of resilience, a pattern of transformation, a pattern of doing the impossible when it matters most. Let me walk you through 3 moments in Japanese history that reveal exactly what kind of nation Japan really is. Moment 1. The Mongol invasions. Go back to the 13th century. The year is 1274. At this time, the Mongol Empire is the most powerful military force the world has ever seen. They have already conquered China, Central Asia, Persia, and Russia. They have crushed every army that stood in their way. There is no precedent, none, for a nation successfully resisting a full-scale Mongol invasion. And Japan? Japan is divided, fragmented. A feudal society made up of competing clans, constantly fighting among themselves. No unified national army, no central command, no experience dealing with a military force of this size and sophistication. On paper, Japan has zero chance. And yet, when the Mongols invade, something extraordinary happens. The Japanese fight back, not as divided factions, but with unexpected unity and ferocity. They resist with everything they have. And then, a massive typhoon strikes the Mongol fleet. The Japanese later call it kamikaze, the divine wind. The invasion fails. But here's the part many people don't know. The Mongols come back. 7 years later, in 1281, they return with an even larger force, the largest naval invasion fleet the world had ever seen at that time. Again, Japan should lose. And again, Japan fights back with the same intensity, the same refusal to surrender. And once again, another typhoon destroys the Mongol fleet. Twice, Japan defeats the greatest military empire on earth twice, without a unified army, without centralized power, as a divided feudal nation. That tells you something important. When Japan faces an existential threat, it doesn't collapse. It unifies, it adapts, and it finds a way to survive. Now let's move to moment 2, the Meiji Restoration. Fast forward to the mid-19th century. Around 1850, the Western powers, Britain, France, America, are expanding aggressively across Asia. They've already carved up China, colonized India, taken Southeast Asia. Japan is next. At this point, Japan is still a feudal society. Samurai swords, limited industrialization, isolated from the rest of the world. There is no realistic scenario, at least on paper, where Japan resists Western domination. Everyone expects Japan to be colonized, but instead Japan does something that shocks the world. It looks at what's happening around it, what happened to China, what colonization really means, and makes a decision, a national decision. We are going to change everything. They don't resist blindly. They don't cling to tradition at all costs. They adapt. They take Western technology, Western industrial systems, military organization, scientific knowledge, and they master it. In just 20 to 30 years, one generation, Japan transforms itself completely. From a feudal society into a modern industrial power, modern navy, modern army, factories, universities, infrastructure. And then in 1905, something happens that sends shockwaves across the world. Japan defeats Russia. The Russian Empire, a major European power, loses to an Asian nation in open war. For the first time in modern history, think about that. In one generation, Japan goes from isolation and backwardness to defeating a European empire. That's not just resilience. That's transformation at a speed almost unheard of in human history. Now let's move to moment 3. Recovery after World War II. This is the most extreme example of all. August 1945. Japan is devastated. 2 atomic bombs dropped on its cities. Firebombing campaigns that destroy most major urban centers. Its navy wiped out. Its army defeated. Its economy shattered. Its cities reduced to rubble. By any historical standard, Japan is finished. Not weakened, not struggling. Finished. There is no reasonable scenario where a country recovers from that level of destruction quickly. And yet, within 20 years, again, one generation, Japan becomes the world's leading manufacturing power, the world's greatest, from total devastation to global dominance. How? Not because of natural resources. Japan has almost none. Not because of geography. It's still a small island nation. Not because of luck, but because of something deeper, a collective mindset, discipline, precision, relentless work ethic, a cultural ability to adapt, rebuild, and improve at extraordinary speed. There is something embedded deeply in Japanese society, something about how people see themselves, how they cooperate, how they respond under pressure, that produces this incredible capacity for recovery and reinvention. And this is the key idea I want you to hold on to, because what we are seeing today is another moment like those, another test, another crisis. And if history tells us anything, it's this: Japan doesn't show its strength when things are easy. Japan reveals its true power when everything is at risk. Why Japan is the surprise winner of this war. Now let's connect everything we've talked about to what is happening right now. Because this war is not just a conflict, it is accelerating massive global shifts. And these shifts are reshaping the entire world order in ways that most people still don't fully understand. There are 3 major trends being driven by this war: deindustrialization, remilitarization, and mercantilism. On the surface, all 3 of these trends look like serious threats to Japan. But when you look deeper, they are actually opportunities, and not just small opportunities, massive ones. Let's break them down one by one. Opportunity 1, remilitarization. For the past 80 years, Japan has operated under strict constitutional limits when it comes to military power. It has maintained a self-defense force, but it has not had a traditional offensive military. No large-scale power projection, no aggressive military posture. Instead, Japan relied heavily on the United States for its security. But now that assumption is being tested. This war is exposing the limits of American power, its stretched resources, its global commitments, and the reality that it cannot be everywhere at once. And Japan is responding, not slowly, not cautiously, but decisively. Japan is already discussing the most significant military expansion in its post-World War II history. We're talking about doubling defense budgets, developing advanced missile systems, forming new strategic alliances, and investing heavily in cutting-edge military technology, hypersonic missiles, advanced drone swarms, next-generation submarines, AI-powered defense systems. This is not a country hesitating. This is a country preparing. And if you remember what we discussed in Part 2, the Meiji Restoration, you'll see the pattern. Japan has done this before. It has taken foreign technology, studied it, improved it, and mastered it faster than anyone expected. And it will do it again. When Japan decides to move, it doesn't move halfway. It moves with precision, speed, and total commitment. Opportunity 2, mercantilism. Now, this is where things get really interesting. The global system of free trade, the system that dominated the world for decades, is starting to break down. Countries are becoming more protective, more self-reliant, more focused on securing their own supply chains. At first glance, this seems like terrible news for Japan. A country that depends on imports for energy, food, and raw materials should struggle in a world where global trade becomes less stable. But here's what most people miss. Japan has been preparing for this scenario for decades. Japan learned a painful lesson during World War II, when its supply lines were cut off and its economy collapsed. And it never forgot that lesson. Since then, Japan has quietly built one of the most efficient economies in the world. It uses roughly half the energy per unit of economic output compared to China. Half. Its manufacturing processes are incredibly efficient, Its technology is designed to maximize output while minimizing resource consumption. It has invested heavily in energy storage, logistics, and advanced production systems. So in a world where energy becomes more expensive and resources become harder to secure, efficiency becomes power. And Japan is one of the most efficient nations on Earth. But there's an even deeper layer to this. Japan is, by nature, an outward-looking nation. It has always been a seafaring country, always trading, always exploring, always engaging with the outside world. That mindset matters, because in a mercantilist world, the countries that thrive are not the ones that isolate themselves, but the ones that know how to navigate global networks, secure resources, and extract value from international relationships. Japan isn't learning how to do this. It has been doing it for centuries. This is not a new skill. This is a return to its core identity. Opportunity 3. The China-Japan dynamic. Now this is the most subtle and most misunderstood piece of the puzzle. Most people assume that a rising China is an existential threat to Japan, and at a basic level that's true. China's growing military power is a real concern. Its ambitions around Taiwan directly impact Japan's energy security. But here's what most analysts fail to see. China and Japan are fundamentally different in how they see the world. China historically sees itself as the center, the Middle Kingdom, a self-sufficient civilization focused inward, prioritizing stability, sovereignty, and internal cohesion. Its instinct in times of uncertainty is to consolidate, to control, to turn inward. Japan is the opposite. Japan is outward-looking. It has always depended on engaging with the world to survive. Trade, exploration, adaptation, these are not optional for Japan. They are essential. So you have two major powers, one looking inward, one looking outward. These are not necessarily conflicting strategies. In fact, they can coexist. And we are already seeing that coexistence today, despite political tensions. Despite territorial disputes in the East China Sea, China and Japan still trade hundreds of billions of dollars every year. Their economies are deeply interconnected. Their people move between the two countries in large numbers. The relationship is complex, but it is not inevitably hostile, and that matters, because it means Japan can operate alongside China, even as China rises, leveraging global trade, innovation, and strategic positioning without necessarily being crushed by it. Now let's bring all of this together. If someone gave me $1 billion and told me to invest in East Asia, China, or Japan, where would I put it? I would put every single dollar into Japan. Not because Japan is perfect. Not because it doesn't have serious problems, it does. But because of what history shows us. Every time Japan has faced an existential crisis, whether it was the Mongol invasions, the threat of Western colonization, or the devastation of World War II, it has responded in the same way, with resilience, with innovation, with transformation, and not slowly, not gradually, but with speed and intensity that shocks the world. And right now, Japan is facing another moment like that. American protection is becoming less certain. China is rising. Global trade is fragmenting. Energy security is under pressure. These are exactly the kinds of conditions that historically bring out the best in Japan. Because Japan does not break when it hits a wall. It finds a way over it, under it, or straight through it. And that is why Japan could very well be the biggest surprise winner of this war. Not because it looks strong today, but because of what it always becomes when everything looks at its worst.